Let me tell you about the day the galaxy learned that humans are either the dumbest species alive or the only ones with any sense left. The jury's still out on that one. It started with Zara, a mother from the Velthani species, which basically looked like what would happen if you crossed a deer with a philosopher and gave it opposable thumbs. She was running for her life through space with her two daughters, Kira and Nix, in a ship that was held together by prayer and whatever the galactic equivalent of duct tape was. The Scareth Empire had rolled through their peaceful homeworld like a cosmic bulldozer, and now every Velthani was either dead, enslaved, or running. Zara fell into the running category, which was good for her, bad for her fuel gauge. Now here's where it gets interesting. The galaxy has this thing called the Galactic Council, which sounds impressive until you realize it's basically a cosmic homeowners association with delusions of grandeur. And just like every homeowners association, when faced with a real crisis, they collectively decided it was somebody else's problem. The Altarians? Sorry, we're having a cultural festival that decade. The Zorblaxians? Our immigration quotas are full. The Crystalline Collective? We don't do biological life forms. It's against our mineral rights. Every species had an excuse that boiled down to the same thing: we're too scared of the Scareth to help you. Zara's ship limped through space like a three-legged dog chasing a mail truck. Her daughters huddled in the back, trying not to look at the sparking control panels or the growing hole in the hull. The ship's computer, programmed with that special brand of artificial intelligence that somehow managed to be both highly advanced and utterly useless, kept cheerfully announcing their imminent doom. Warning, hull breach detected. Estimated time until catastrophic failure, 17 minutes. Have a pleasant day. That's when they spotted Sol, a little yellow star with a reputation for being home to a species so new to the galactic community that most civilizations weren't even sure they existed. The official reports described humans as loud, unpredictable, and possibly dangerous. The unofficial reports added, and they put pineapple on pizza, which is clearly a sign of mental instability. Zara didn't care. Her ship was dying, her daughters were scared, and Earth was the only planet in range. Sometimes desperation makes decisions for you. The last thing she remembered before the crash was her ship's computer making one final announcement: approaching unknown world. Species classification: human. Threat level: undefined. Recommendation: good luck. Then everything went black, and somewhere in rural Montana, Jake Morrison looked up from his morning coffee to see a streak of fire painting the sky, followed by the kind of explosion that makes you wonder if you should have gotten more insurance. Jake Morrison was the kind of farmer who fixed things with wire and stubbornness, raised cattle that respected him, and had never met a problem he couldn't solve with common sense and a good cup of coffee. He was not, however, prepared for alien refugees crash landing in his back 40. The smoking crater where his prize-winning corn used to grow now contained what looked like a metallic egg that had been through a blender. Jake stood there in his boots and overalls, holding a steaming mug and trying to process what he was seeing. "Dad, are you going to do something or just stand there looking like a confused scarecrow?" Riley Morrison, his 16-year-old daughter, appeared beside him with her phone already recording. She had inherited her father's practical nature and her mother's sharp tongue, which made her a force to be reckoned with in the high school debate team and apparently in first contact situations. "I'm thinking," Jake said, which was his standard response to most of life's curveballs. The egg-ship thing cracked open like a metallic flower, releasing a cloud of steam that smelled like ozone and lavender. Out stumbled Zara, who looked like she'd been through a cosmic washing machine, followed by her two daughters. Riley lowered her phone. "Dad, I don't think they're from around here." "What gave it away?" Jake asked, watching as Zara tried to communicate through a series of clicks, whistles, and gestures that looked like she was either asking for help or trying to summon a space taxi. This is where most species would have called their military, set up a perimeter, and started making demands. Jake Morrison looked at this scared mother with her two frightened children and did what any decent human would do. He invited them in for breakfast. The language barrier was immediately apparent. Zara spoke in musical tones that sounded like a flute having an argument with a wind chime. Jake responded in English, which apparently sounded like rocks being thrown into a garbage disposal. Riley, who had learned more languages from online gaming than most people learn in college, started experimenting with basic concepts. She pointed to herself. Riley. Then to Jake. Dad. Then to the house. Home. Zara caught on quickly. She touched her own chest. Zara. Then indicated her daughters, Kira, Nix. It was about this time that Director Walsh showed up, because apparently when alien ships crash land in Montana, someone in Washington notices. Walsh was the kind of government agent who wore suits that cost more than Jake's truck, and had probably never seen a cow that wasn't in a picture. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the extraterrestrial entities, Walsh announced, emerging from a black SUV with three other agents who looked like they'd been carved from the same block of bureaucratic wood. Jake looked at the scared alien family, then at Walsh, then back at the family. They're having breakfast. Sir, this is a matter of national security. They're eating pancakes. Walsh looked confused, which was probably the first genuine emotion he'd shown in years. Pancakes. Riley held up her phone, which now showed a video of Kira and Nix cautiously trying maple syrup while Zara attempted to figure out how a fork worked. They've gone viral, Agent Walsh. #alien breakfast is trending. This was the moment when Director Walsh realized that first contact protocols had never accounted for the possibility that aliens might just be people who needed help, or that humans might respond to them with pancakes and trending hashtags instead of weapons and demands. Sir, Walsh said, his voice taking on the tone of someone who was about to have a very long day, we need to discuss the implications of harboring extraterrestrial refugees. Jake finished his coffee and looked at the government agent with the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining things to particularly slow cattle. Son, they're scared, they're hungry, and they're about as dangerous as a wet cat. Now you can either help or get out of my kitchen. And that's how humanity's first diplomatic contact with an alien species began, with pancakes, viral videos, and a farmer who was too stubborn to be intimidated by his own government. Within 6 hours, Jake Morrison's farm had become ground zero for the biggest media circus since reality TV was invented. News vans surrounded his property like vultures circling roadkill. Reporters spoke breathlessly into cameras about humanity's first contact with an alien species. And conspiracy theorists were already claiming the whole thing was a hoax designed to distract from the fact that birds aren't real. General Hartwell arrived in a helicopter that was larger than Jake's barn and twice as loud. He was the kind of military officer who treated everything like a war and everyone like a potential enemy combatant. He also had the unfortunate habit of speaking in acronyms that nobody understood and assuming that volume could substitute for actual authority. This is now a DEFCON 2 situation involving potential ET-human interface protocols under NSA Directive 7741 Alpha. He announced to anyone within shouting distance, which was basically everyone in 3 counties because he had apparently swallowed a bullhorn. Jake looked at Riley, who was busy teaching Kira how to use a tablet. Did he just classify our breakfast guests as a national security threat? I think he did, Dad. Also, I think he's having some kind of acronym seizure. Director Walsh, who had spent the morning trying to establish some kind of reasonable communication protocol, watched in horror as General Hartwell began setting up what looked like a small military base in the North Pasture. Sir, with respect, perhaps we should focus on establishing peaceful relations rather than treating this as a potential invasion. Negative, Agent Walsh. These ETs could be advanced scouts for a full-scale invasion. We need to extract intel and establish defensive positions. This is where Riley Morrison proved that teenagers, when properly motivated, can accomplish things that make adults question their life choices. She had spent the morning working with Zara using a combination of translation apps, drawing, and what she called universal math concepts, which was basically showing that humans had figured out that 2 + 2 = 4, just like everyone else. "General," Riley said, approaching with the kind of confidence that only comes from being 16 and having nothing to lose, "I think you should know that they're not scouts. They're refugees." "Refugees?" General Hartwell looked like she had just told him that gravity was optional. "From what?" "What?" Riley held up her tablet, which now showed a rough translation of Zara's story. "In the Scarith Empire. They're conquering species across the galaxy, and apparently everyone else is too scared to help refugee families." This was the moment when the scope of the situation became clear. Earth wasn't dealing with first contact. Earth was dealing with galactic politics, and according to Zara's story, humanity had just volunteered to be the only species brave enough, or stupid enough, to help. "The other species," Walsh asked, reading over Riley's shoulder, "what do they think about humans?" Riley consulted her tablet. "According to Mom here, the official galactic assessment is that humans are unpredictable, potentially dangerous, and lacking in proper diplomatic protocols. Oh, and apparently our music is aggressively illogical." Jake laughed. "Well, they got that last part right." General Hartwell was still processing the implications. "Are you telling me that we're completely unknown to this galactic community?" "Not unknown," Riley corrected. "We're like the weird neighbors that everyone talks about, but nobody actually wants to deal with. They think we're either going to blow something up or do something so strange that it breaks their understanding of how civilized species should behave." This was when Zara, who had been watching the human discussion with the kind of fascination usually reserved for watching traffic accidents, decided to contribute. She activated a small device that projected what looked like a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Points of light indicated different species, and as she gestured, Riley's tablet began translating. "She says this shows all the species that have signed the Galactic Accords," Riley announced. "These are the civilized ones who follow proper diplomatic protocols and maintain peaceful relations." The map showed hundreds of species, all connected by lines that indicated trade routes, diplomatic relationships, and mutual defense agreements. It was an impressive network of civilization that had clearly taken millennia to develop. "Where are we?" Walsh asked. Riley consulted with Zara and pointed to a small, isolated dot on the edge of the map. "There. That little yellow star with the notation that roughly translates to caution, unpredictable locals." Jake looked at the map, then at his property, which was now surrounded by military equipment, news vans, and what appeared to be a taco truck that had somehow found its way past the security perimeter. "So let me get this straight," he said. "The entire galaxy knows about us, but they think we're too crazy to talk to. And now we're the only ones willing to help refugee families because everyone else is too scared of the big bad empire." "That's about the size of it," Riley confirmed. Jake finished his coffee and looked at General Hartwell, who was still staring at the galactic map like it might bite him. "Well, General, looks like we're about to find out if the galaxy is right about us being unpredictable. And that's how humanity learned that sometimes being the unknown quantity in an equation is exactly what the galaxy needs." The Scarith Empire ships arrived exactly 72 hours later, because apparently even galactic conquerors believe in giving proper notice before making unreasonable demands. They materialized in Earth's orbit like unwelcome party guests who brought their own spotlights and refused to leave. Ambassador Krexex, the lead Scarith diplomat, looked like what would happen if you crossed a shark with a tax auditor and gave it a superiority complex. He contacted Earth through channels that Director Walsh was still trying to figure out, delivering an ultimatum that was both impressively arrogant and monumentally stupid. "Primitive species of Sol 3, his message began, which was already off to a bad start, "You are harboring fugitives from the rightful authority of the Scarith Empire. Surrender the Velthani refugees immediately, or face the consequences of defying civilized galactic law." This message was delivered directly to every television, radio, and internet-connected device on Earth simultaneously, which meant that roughly 8 billion humans heard themselves being called primitive and threatened in the same sentence. Jake Morrison, who was watching this on his kitchen TV while making his fourth pot of coffee that day, looked at the screen and then at Zara, who was teaching his neighbor's kids how to fold origami spaceships. "Did that overgrown fish just call us primitive?" he asked. Riley, who had spent the last 3 days becoming Earth's unofficial alien translator, nodded. He also demanded that we hand over Mom and the girls, or else. Or else what? He didn't specify, but I'm guessing it involves something unpleasant happening to our planet. This was the moment when humanity collectively decided that Ambassador Krex could go file his ultimatum in a place where the sun doesn't shine. And several billion people began expressing this opinion through social media protest signs and what appeared to be a coordinated effort to send him pictures of middle fingers from every country on Earth. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, was having what diplomatically could be called a complete meltdown. Emergency sessions were called, strongly worded letters were drafted, and various species began the complex process of pretending they had never heard of Earth while secretly hoping someone else would fix this mess. The Altarians sent a message expressing their deep concern about the situation. The Zorblaxians issued a statement about the need for peaceful resolution through proper channels. The Crystalline Collective announced that they were monitoring the situation with great interest, which was their way of saying they were watching from a safe distance with popcorn. Director Walsh, who had been trying to manage the situation through proper diplomatic channels, but found himself in the unique position of representing a species that had no official diplomatic protocols with anyone and was apparently about to go to war with the Galactic Empire over breakfast guests. "Sir," he said to Jake, "because somehow the farmer had become the unofficial voice of humanity in this crisis, we need to consider the implications of our response. The Scarith Empire has conquered dozens of worlds." Jake looked at him with the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining why you can't put aluminum foil in a microwave. "Son, are you suggesting we hand over a scared mother and her children to space bullies?" "I'm suggesting we consider the survival of our species." "Well, I'm considering the survival of my conscience." This conversation was interrupted by Riley, who had been monitoring galactic communications through methods that would probably give several government agencies nightmares. "Dad, you need to see this." She showed him her tablet, which displayed a flood of messages from across the galaxy. They were encrypted, anonymous, and all saying basically the same thing: "We're with you, but we can't say it publicly." "What am I looking at?" Jake asked. "Support," Riley said. "Turns out half the galaxy has been waiting for someone crazy enough to stand up to the Scarith Empire. They've been bullying everyone for centuries, and nobody's been willing to call their bluff." "Are we calling their bluff?" "Dad, I don't think we're smart enough to bluff. I think we're just doing what's right and seeing what happens." General Hartwell, who had been preparing for various doomsday scenarios, looked at the intelligence reports coming in about the Scarith Empire and realized something that changed his entire perspective on the situation. "They're not conquerors," he announced during an emergency meeting that included everyone from the president to the guy who delivered pizza to the farm. "They're bullies." "Big difference." "Explain," Walsh said. "Conquerors take territory and hold it. Bullies threaten people until they give up and go away. The Scarith Empire has never actually fought a real war. They show up, make threats, everyone surrenders, and they move on to the next target." Jake looked at General Hartwell with something approaching respect. "So what you're saying is, they're the kind of people who are real tough until someone punches them in the nose?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Riley looked up from her tablet. "Dad, I think I figured out why the galaxy thinks we're dangerous." "Why's that?" "Because we're the only species too stupid to be properly afraid of bullies." And that's how humanity learned that sometimes the best diplomatic strategy is to be too stubborn to know when you're supposed to give up. The next morning brought something that nobody expected, a secret meeting request from the Galactic Council, and it's delivered through channels so covert that even the people using them weren't entirely sure how they worked. Ambassador 3PO, yes, that was actually his name, represented a coalition of species that had been secretly undermining the Scarith Empire for decades. He looked like a cross between a penguin and a philosophy professor, and he spoke in the kind of diplomatic language that could make ordering coffee sound like a peace treaty. Esteemed representatives of the human species, he began, we come to you with a proposal that may benefit all parties involved in this regrettable situation. Jake looked at Director Walsh, who shrugged. Riley, who had become humanity's unofficial translator for everything weird, stepped forward. What kind of proposal? She asked. For centuries, the Scarith Empire has maintained control through fear and intimidation. They threaten species surrender, and the cycle continues. However, recent events have created an unprecedented opportunity for, shall we say, a different approach. You want us to fight them, Jake said, because farmers have a way of cutting through diplomatic nonsense. We want you to continue being yourselves, Ambassador 3PO clarified. Your species' reputation for unpredictability has already caused significant concern within the Scarith command structure. They are accustomed to dealing with civilized species who follow proper protocols. You do not. Riley laughed. So you want us to be the crazy neighbors who don't follow the homeowners association rules? That is actually a remarkably accurate analogy. This was when Zara, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, decided to contribute something that changed everything. She activated her translation device and began speaking in the kind of tone that suggested she had been waiting for this moment. She says the Scarith Empire isn't as powerful as they pretend to be, Riley translated. They've been using the same ships and the same tactics for centuries because they've never needed to innovate. When everyone surrenders immediately, why would you need to improve your military? What's she getting at? Walsh asked. She's saying they're all show and no substance. They're flying museum pieces and relying on reputation instead of actual strength. Ambassador 3PO looked uncomfortable, which was impressive given that his species didn't have traditional facial expressions. The Velthani have unique insights into Scarith technology. This is precisely why the Empire is so determined to recapture them. Wait, Jake said. Are you telling me that Mom here and her daughters are some kind of secret weapons? Not weapons, Riley corrected after consulting with Zara. Engineers. The Velthani are the galaxy's best ship designers. The Scarith Empire has been trying to force them to upgrade their fleet. This revelation explained everything. The Scarith Empire wasn't conquering worlds because they were strong. They were conquering worlds because everyone was too scared to test their strength. And now they were desperate to get the Velthani back because their reputation was about to be challenged by a species that apparently didn't know how to be properly intimidated. So what's the plan? Jake asked. Ambassador 3PO looked around the room, which now included not just government officials but also Jake's neighbors, Riley's gaming friends who had been helping with translations, and Mrs. Henderson from down the road who had brought cookies to the alien refugees. The plan, he said, is for humanity to continue doing exactly what you have been doing. Be unpredictable. Be stubborn. Be willing to help people who need help regardless of the consequences. That's it? General Hartwell asked. That's your master strategy? General. Ambassador 3PO said, in 3 days, your species has accomplished something that the rest of the galaxy has been trying to do for centuries. You have called the Scarith Empire's bluff and survived. More importantly, you have inspired other species to remember that bullies only have power if you let them. Riley looked at her tablet, which was now showing a real-time map of the galaxy. Dad, you need to see this. The map showed dozens of species that had been secretly harboring refugees, providing safe passage, and generally undermining the Scarith Empire's authority. The network of resistance had been there all along, hidden and afraid to act openly. What am I looking at? Jake asked. The galaxy's underground railroad, Riley said. Apparently, we weren't the only ones helping refugees. We were just the only ones stupid enough to do it publicly. Ambassador 3PO nodded. Your species' willingness to openly defy the Empire has given others the courage to reveal their own resistance efforts. The Scarith Empire's power was always based on the illusion that they were unopposed. Jake looked at the map, then at Zara and her daughters, who were now playing a card game with some of the local kids. So what happens now? Now, Ambassador 3PO said, we find out whether the galaxy is ready to stop being afraid of bullies. And that's how humanity learned that sometimes the best way to lead a revolution is to be too stubborn to realize you're starting one. The confrontation that followed was less like a space battle and more like a cosmic intervention, with humanity playing the role of the well-meaning relative who refuses to let family members keep fighting at Thanksgiving dinner. Ambassador Krexx arrived at Earth expecting to find a primitive species ready to surrender. Instead, he found a planet that had turned his ultimatum into a meme, organized a galaxy-wide protest movement, and somehow convinced half the civilized species to show up for what Jake Morrison had started calling the galaxy's most overdue group therapy session. The meeting took place in Earth's orbit, with representatives from dozens of species arriving in ships that hadn't been seen together since the last Galactic Council meeting. The Scarith Empire ships, which had looked so intimidating when they first arrived, now seemed small and outdated compared to the assembled fleet. Jake Morrison, who had somehow become humanity's chief diplomat despite having no qualifications other than common sense and a stubborn refusal to be intimidated, addressed the assembled representatives via a communication system that Riley had cobbled together from gaming equipment and alien technology. All right, everyone, let's get this sorted out, he said, speaking to the galaxy with the same tone he used to settle disputes between his neighbors. We've got a scared family that needs help, a bully that's been terrorizing everyone, and a whole lot of people who've been too afraid to speak up. Time to put on our grown-up pants and deal with this. Ambassador Krexx, who had never encountered a diplomatic approach that could be described as aggressively reasonable, tried to maintain his authority. This is not a negotiation. The Scarith Empire does not bargain with primitive species. Well, that's your first problem right there, Jake replied. You keep calling everyone primitive, but from where I'm standing, the most primitive thing I've seen is a grown civilization that solves problems by picking on people smaller than them. This was the moment when the galaxy's underground resistance revealed itself. Species after species began transmitting evidence of Scarith Empire atrocities, refugee networks, and the true scope of their resistance movement. The Empire's reputation for invincibility crumbled in real time as the galaxy watched. Riley, who had been coordinating the information release, looked up from her tablet. Dad, I think Ambassador Krexx is having some kind of breakdown. Indeed, the Scarith diplomat was discovering that his empire's greatest weapon, fear, had been neutralized by a species that was apparently too naive to understand that they should be afraid. The Empire will not tolerate this insubordination, Krexx declared, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried just days earlier. You know what? Jake said. I think you're right. I don't think your empire can tolerate people standing up to you. But here's the thing that's your empire's problem, not ours. This was when Ambassador 3PO stepped forward with a proposal that was both brilliant and completely insane, but a galaxy-wide referendum on the Scarith Empire's continued authority, with Earth serving as the neutral mediator. You want us to be what now? Jake asked. The galactic equivalent of Switzerland, Riley explained. The neutral ground where species can work out their differences without fear of retaliation. Jake looked at his farm, which was still surrounded by alien ships, news crews, and what appeared to be a small carnival that had somehow set up in his south pasture. I'm a cattle farmer, not a diplomat. Dad, Riley said, you've done more diplomacy in the last week than most species do in a century. You got everyone to sit down and talk instead of shooting at each other. The vote, when it came, was less about defeating the Scarith Empire and more about the galaxy deciding it was tired of being afraid. Species after species chose to withdraw their recognition of Scarith authority, and within hours, the great galactic empire discovered that their power had always been based on everyone agreeing to let them be in charge. Ambassador Krex, faced with the collapse of everything he had believed about his empire's strength, made one last desperate threat. The Scarith fleet will not allow this rebellion to stand. What fleet? Riley asked, showing him her tablet, which now displayed real-time tracking of Scarith ships across the galaxy. You mean the 12 ships that have been pretending to be everywhere at once for the last 2 centuries? The revelation that the mighty Scarith Empire had been maintaining their reputation with a fleet smaller than most species' local defense forces was the final blow to their credibility. The galaxy had been afraid of a paper tiger. Jake looked at the assembled representatives, then at Zara and her daughters, who were now being welcomed by species that had been too afraid to help them just days earlier. "So what happens now?" he asked. Ambassador 3PO, who had been taking notes throughout the entire crisis, looked up from his tablet. "Now, Mr. Morrison, the galaxy learns what it means to have humans as neighbors. And that's how humanity saved the galaxy, by being too stubborn to know when they were supposed to give up, too naive to understand proper diplomatic protocol, and too decent to let a family in need suffer alone. The galaxy never quite figured out if humans were the smartest species they'd ever met, or the luckiest idiots in the universe. But they did learn one thing: sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to be too human to realize it's impossible.